Now, it would be a mistake to think that the only portion of education that was being looked at this time was things like elementary schools and high schools. There was also going to be a major change in higher education. The way colleges were being run, the courses that were being offered were changing there as well. The idea of changing and fixing education was not going to just be at the lower levels, but it was going to be at the other end of the spectrum as well. We as a nation have a really good history of higher education. We have had colleges in this country going back to the 1600s. So it has really become part of American culture to keep pushing in regards to education. Now, the thing is, the time frame in which we're talking, you're not going to see, as many college degrees as you would today. Now, today you have a lot of people who start college, but not everybody finishes. I have seen studies that say it's up to 2/3 of the people who start a college, like a 4-year college, end up actually quitting before they get their degree. Now, back at the turn of the century, when we're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s, you had approximately 2% of the American population had attended college. Now, that is a very, very small amount. And they had attended college, for a variety of reasons, a variety of different majors and whatnot. But you do have to keep into mind that college at that point in time was very, very different from how college is today. College today, we think about anybody with the drive, the intelligence, and whatnot to go can definitely go. Back then, it was very different. Most college students at that point in time came from middle class or wealthy families. So there were the stories of those who came from more humble beginnings, more meager beginnings, and they went on to have a college career and get an education and things like that. But in all honesty, those were the exceptions. For the most part, if you were going to go to college, it's because you came from either a wealthy family or a middle class family. The working class families, that wasn't really going to be an option per se. It was just not pursued. Okay, so the reason colleges predominantly existed at this time was to prepare well-to-do young men from these well-off families for successful careers in business. Okay, the whole concept was that colleges were essentially a training ground in order to be able to survive in the business world. You had a lot of different companies at the time. You had a lot of family-owned businesses and things like that. And the idea was that you would go off to college and you would learn everything that you needed in order to continue the family business or to be successful in business. There wasn't a great deal of choices when it came to majors. Today you can major in just about anything imaginable. Back then it was much more streamlined with just about one particular concept in mind. Now, the time frame we've been talking about, late 1800s, in this case, between 1880 and 1890, you had about 150 new colleges founded in the United States. Now, it is not uncommon today. You still hear about colleges, that are just starting and things like that. But you go back and look, this is a sizable number. We've always had colleges, as I said, going back to colonial times. In fact, we have the College William and Mary is still actually operating under a royal charter from England. So to see 150 new colleges founded, this is going to greatly expand the number of people who can attend college and the number of people who are going to be able to get, some kind of education that way. Between 1880 and 1920, the number of college students quadrupled. So you're seeing 150 new colleges, for example, just in that 10-year period, but during that next 40-year period, you're going to see the number of students on various college campi, plural for campuses, going through and quadrupling, 4 times as many. It would be the equivalent of if in that time frame Ripon High went from being about 1,000 students to being 4,000 students. It was a dramatic increase in the number of students. And with all these new students, you're going to see changes in what classes they were taking, what they were studying, how they were going about doing things, and you're going to see how this is going to have a major impact down the road. You have to take into account that education is not really about the immediate time right now. It's about coming down the road. It's about what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. And these students that were now getting a college education were going to have a greater effect as time progressed. So what were they going to be studying at this point in time? What was the majors that people wanted to look at? What was it that was going to allow them to have some kind of future? Okay. Now, during this time frame, it wasn't just the addition of colleges. Excuse me. As I said, you had a number of colleges being created. You had a dramatic increase in the number of students who were actually taking classes at this point in time. And the result was that you're going to see a change in the curriculum. Now, we talked about this previously. We said that for high schools at this time, they changed the curriculum from just the reading, writing, and arithmetic to include things like history and science and literature, plus the various classes for things like bookkeeping. So college is going to keep up with that. They're going to continue this process of adding new classes to their curriculum. Now, previously, excuse me, many universities taught only classical subjects, things like Greek and Latin. Now, the ability to speak Latin to me is a really cool idea, but at the same time, I'm not sure what kind of job you could get with a Latin degree today. I'm sure there is something out there, but I just don't know what it is off the top of my head. I was a political science major. Under the classic system there, political science wasn't even thought of, so I am a beneficiary of all these changes. Excuse me. Now, in the late 1800s, you're going to see the addition of a number of modern subjects. Just like I said with the high schools, you're going to see these changes in regards to the college level. And a big part of this is going to be because supply and demand. Okay, there is going to be the need for various, jobs to be filled, and the colleges in response are going to offer the training in those particular jobs. In fact, it was in response to the needs of big business that the research university would emerge. That university who was there to try and do more and more research, to figure out things, to go through and advance technology. You might remember we talked about Thomas Edison. And we said he had the first research laboratory there in Menlo Park, New Jersey. Well, this is along the same concept. We're going to go through and we're going to see colleges now become centers of research. Okay, you can think about it today. You have a lot of inventions coming out of colleges. You have a lot of work being done on, you name it. This was something new back then. Today we take it for granted. Today we understand that the modern research university is there and it will, figure out A, B, C, and D. In this case, it was something new. And it came into existence because there was the need of big business and the university wanted to fulfill that. Now, one of the courses that they started to add was modern languages. Okay, this is the languages spoken today. So it could be, English, French, Spanish, German, Japanese, any of the above. Because you're starting to see more and more businesses operating with more and more countries. As a result, those businesses need people who can operate in whatever language they need to at that particular time. So going through and teaching people modern languages was something new. Traditionally, all you did was Greek and Latin. Now you're going to get current languages, and you're going to be able to therefore do translating work, or you're going to be able to represent a company somewhere else and things like that. So colleges are going to start to include modern languages. I personally told you guys before, I'm 1 unit short of a minor in German. So I took German while I was in college. Those same modern languages can still be studied at pretty much any college today. They all have various language departments. Another thing that the universities are going to start to teach are the physical sciences. Okay? Now, physical sciences, these are things like chemistry, geology, physics, things along those lines. Again, business needs this research done. The businesses at this time, the industries at this time, they are constantly on the outlook for various ways to improve their business, to do things better, to have a better return on their investment. And the sciences are going to be able to help with that. The sciences are going to be able to help come up with various synthetic alternatives to different issues. So you're seeing modern languages, you're seeing the physical sciences. Another big one at this time is psychology and sociology. Now, this is where I come in. Sociology is where you would find political science, for example. Psychology was relatively new. We're talking about the study of the human mind. So there is psychology and there is psychiatry. Psychiatry, you're a medical doctor. Psychology, you're a therapist of some kind. So you're seeing the schools now teaching psychology and sociology, both of which are ways to figure out how to get more work done by the workers, how to get people to behave in different ways, how to encourage them to do A instead of B. So you're looking at all of these things as ways that the various industries at the time were trying to get needs filled. And all of these needs could be benefited by things like this. Now, this is not an exhaustive list in any way, shape, or form. There were a great number of other things, and as time has continued to progress, more and more areas of study have been added to the college curriculum. Another thing that came about at this time were professional schools and things like law and medicine. You have to understand, for a long period of time, all it took to be a lawyer was you read some law books and you put out a sign that said whatever your name was, lawyer. That was it. There was no requirements to go to college or law school or take a test or anything like that. And the way it worked was, if you were a good lawyer, you stayed in business. If you stunk as a lawyer, you quickly went out of business. And the scary thing is, pretty much the same was true of medicine. For a long period of time, medicine was more art than science. And there were a lot of times that people went into a hospital and came out sicker than they went in. You look back to the Civil War, for example. Quite literally, they would have to just saw off limbs, legs and arms and stuff like that if they'd been shot in a certain way. And you think about today, we would go through and sterilize the instrument before you use it on somebody else. No, the doctor just kind of wiped it off on the apron he was wearing and then started cutting on somebody else. So schools in law and medicine were established with very specific criteria in order to graduate. That way people had a better feeling about the person they were hiring as either a doctor or they were hiring as an attorney, because it meant that they would now have more knowledge. They would have a better understanding of how law or medicine worked. Before this, it was really potluck. It was really hit or miss. You may or may not have gotten somebody that was really good, or you may have gotten somebody who was really, really bad. Now, a number of private colleges and universities at this time began requiring entrance exams. Now, you can think in terms of like the SAT or the ACT or things like that today, which are pretty much universal. But back then, that was pretty much unheard of. Private colleges, private universities were already trying to go through and sort out all the people who wanted to go to college. They wanted to try and figure out those who were most suited to actually succeed. It does no good to go to college if you don't have the ability to go through and study or things like that. So they wanted to start trying to pick and choose who was going to their particular university. Now, in some respects, this was just to make them look better. It was to try and increase the prestige they had from more, graduates and things along those lines. And in others, it was literally an attempt to make sure that those who would have too much trouble didn't waste their own time. Now, this is for private colleges at the time. At that time, some state universities, all they required was that you had a high school diploma. If you graduated high school, you had just completed all the admission standards and requirements to go to fill-in-the-blank school. So it was a very different world. Some schools would go through and they would require a rigorous academic, recruitment process or something along those lines. Others, did you graduate high school? Congratulations, you're in. And it just all depended. Again, we're looking at a time where they're going through and they're starting to sort of formalize even the higher education, because at this point it was really haphazard and nobody really knew what kind of quality education they would or would not receive. And generally speaking, most people don't want just potluck on that. Now, we had spoken about previously that the changes that were happening in education as far as elementary and high school goes really were affecting the white community much more than the African American community. And while that also is going to be true in regards to higher education, in regards to college, it's not going to be exactly the same. There's going to be some better numbers, not phenomenally better, but at least some better. Okay. Now, it was following the Civil War. You had thousands of newly freed African Americans began attending college for the very first time. Most of these newly freed slaves had never had any form of education whatsoever, let alone any kind of dream of going to college. So you can see how education is going to really change the world in this respect. Okay. It was with the help of something called the Freedmen's Bureau. Okay, this was an organization designed toward the end of the Civil War that was supposed to help the newly freed slaves get into society and make a life for themselves. With the help of the Freedmen's Bureau, you had colleges like Howard and Fisk universities are founded back about between 1865 and 1868. These are now referred to as part of the historical black colleges and universities. So the reason that the Freedmen's Bureau helped get colleges like this started was the fact that a great number of private universities would not allow black students to attend. Now, this was not the case for every college throughout the country, but it was predominant. It was the majority of colleges were that way. So as a result, the Freedmen's Bureau looked at what was going on. They came to the conclusion that there was the need for African Americans to be able to attend universities. And so since they were not going to be allowed in certain universities now, perhaps they could make ones that would allow them in. Okay? Now, in 1900, only about 4% of all African Americans were in attendance at any college or some kind of professional school. So again, we're looking at a very, very small number of individuals. We already talked about how few people just in general had any kind of college degree, and that was 2% of the American population. Now we're looking at 4% of just the African American population. So we're getting to smaller and smaller numbers. Now you do have a gentleman by the name of Booker T. Washington. Okay, now he founded the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. And he did so because he had a particular thought in mind as to how to get rid of the problem of racism in the United States. Booker T. Washington believed that racism would end when blacks acquired useful labor skills and were seen as valuable to society. His theory was that you could go to school, in this case we had the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. You would go to school, you would learn various trades, you would learn various skills, you would learn things that would make you a necessary and important part of a community. And as you learned these things, it meant that more and more people would look at you as an equal because you had a valuable skill. So all these different skills that were necessary for society to survive were going to be taught at the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute. And Washington was a big supporter of this theory. Now, the thing is, this is not the only theory at the time. There were those who agreed with this. There were those who agreed that what would get rid of racism would be once the white population of the United States at the time saw the black population as being, beneficial. This is going to be something that takes a great deal of time. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. This is going to be a process that could take years or generations to reach. And while there were those who were willing to look at it this way and were willing to go about this long-term process, there were still others that weren't willing to take that long. There were those who wanted greater independence and greater equality right away. So while you did have Booker T. Washington working from one end of the spectrum, he was not going to be the only person doing this. There were others that were going to, try and fix things in a different way. Now, as I said, there were those who were willing to go through and work gradually to achieve that equality. There were others, however, as I said, that wanted more immediate results. They wanted to go through and get equality right now. One of those was a gentleman by the name of W.B. Du Bois. Now, I have seen his name pronounced as W.B. Du Bois, but I believe it's supposed to be Du Bois. If I'm wrong, I do apologize. Now, he was a black educator, but he disagreed with Booker T. Washington. He didn't think that that was the right way to go. He felt that waiting and going slowly was going to cause more harm than good. Okay. Now, Du Bois had been the very first black individual to ever get a doctorate from Harvard University. So this is an individual that has gone through, they have done a lot of work, they have put up with a lot, they have tried very hard to succeed, and in this case, he has a degree from Harvard University. Not an easy thing to do. And he believes that it's not through work that blacks are going to achieve equality with whites, but instead through a liberal arts education, okay? He is going to create something called the Niagara Movement. Now, the Niagara Movement is going to insist that blacks go after a liberal arts education. That is the general type of education that you get at any college today. Not look at doing things in learning a trade or some kind of skill or things like that, but just a regular, normal college education. And he felt that this would move racism down the road a lot further. This would increase the equality between whites and blacks much quicker. Now, both these gentlemen had their reasons for how they wanted to do things, both of whom were very, very convinced that their way was the best choice. It's a question of history as to which seems to work better or which one seems to work worse. Both of them were trying for the same thing. Both of them wanted to expand higher education for African Americans, but they were just going about it in different ways. There were two different roads they were traveling down, both going to the same destination, but they were just going to get there in two radically different ways.